To my wonderful wife. 15 amazing years. I watched my husband Ronald raise his champagne glass across the candlelit table, his smile perfect, his words rehearsed. I cut him off in flawless Mandarin, Chinese. I heard every word you said about me 6 weeks ago. After all my years of sacrifices, this is what I get. The glass froze mid-air. Every drop of colour drained from Ronald's face as my words hung between us. Sharp, deliberate, impossible. I watched his hand start to tremble, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out at first. Then, barely a whisper. You speak Chinese? Yes, I do. 5 years, Ronald. I've understood every single word for 5 years. The couple at the next table stopped mid-conversation. A waiter froze with a tray balanced on his palm. I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes turning toward us, phones probably already recording, but I didn't care anymore. Ronald's champagne glass tilted, forgotten, spilling golden liquid across the table like his carefully constructed lies finally seeping through. His sister Emily's voice echoed in my head, her cruel laugh from 6 weeks ago still as fresh as a slap. The words I'd understood perfectly while standing frozen in my own kitchen, teacup slipping from my hands. Words in Mandarin he thought I could never comprehend. If you want to know what happened here, hit that subscribe button right now, because it gets worse than you can imagine. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was playing you all along? Drop a comment and let me know, because what I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, except it happened to me. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Margaret Thompson. 6 weeks before that anniversary dinner, I stood in my kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, preparing tea for my husband's sister. Emily Granger had flown in from Seattle for a week-long visit, and I'd spent the morning cleaning guest rooms and planning meals like the dutiful wife I'd been for 15 years. I was 65 years old, married to my second husband, Ronald, and completely unprepared for what I was about to hear. The kettle whistled as I arranged cookies on my grandmother's china plate. From the living room, I heard their voices, Ronald and Emily, speaking in rapid Mandarin. They always switched to Chinese when they wanted privacy, probably assuming their elderly American sister-in-law couldn't possibly understand. But I understood every single word. 5 years earlier, when Ronald started landing major contracts with Chinese clients, I'd watched him drift further into a world I couldn't access. Business dinners I wasn't invited to, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. I'd felt myself becoming invisible in my own marriage, useless, outdated. So I'd done something about it. I enrolled in online Mandarin courses while he traveled for work. I hired private tutors who came to the house during his business trips. I spent hours with language apps, practicing tones and characters until my pronunciation was flawless. It was going to be my surprise, proof that I could still be relevant, still be useful to him. I'd planned to reveal it on our anniversary. Imagine his delight, I'd thought, when his wife could finally participate in his world. I never got the chance. Because on that Tuesday afternoon, standing in my kitchen with a teacup in my trembling hands, I heard my husband say in perfect Mandarin, "She's served her purpose. Once the property transfers are complete, I'm done." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the counter, telling myself I'd misheard, misunderstood. My Mandarin wasn't that good yet. It couldn't be. But Emily's response shattered any doubt. "You've played the devoted husband long enough. Her assets are almost entirely in your name now." Ronald laughed. Actually, I laughed. The sound carried from the living room into my kitchen, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Desperate old widow with money, he said, still chuckling. Exactly what I needed 15 years ago. The teacup slipped from my hands. It shattered against the tile floor, porcelain exploding into 100 pieces, but neither of them heard it over their conversation. Emily's voice continued, casual, matter of fact. Those grown kids of hers never liked you anyway. At least you'll be set for life. My legs gave out. I grabbed the counter with both hands, knuckles white, trying to stay upright as the kitchen tilted around me. 15 years. 15 years of marriage, of trust, of building a life together. It had all been calculated. Every smile, every kiss, every whispered, "I love you," in the dark. To understand how completely he'd destroyed me, you need to know who I was before Ronald Granger walked into my life. I met Paul Thompson when I was 17 years old. He had kind eyes and terrible jokes, and he asked me to come home with a hand-painted poster that said, "You're Paul-sitively amazing." We got married at 22, right after college, and built a beautiful life together. 30 years. 2 children, Sarah and Michael. 4 grandchildren who called me Nana and filled my house with noise and sticky fingerprints and unconditional love. Paul worked as an engineer, provided well for us, never forgot our anniversary, and held my hand through every joy and heartbreak life threw our way. Then, at 62, he had a massive heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I became a widow at 50, and my entire world collapsed. I wasn't just grieving my husband. I was grieving my identity, my purpose, my future. Everything I'd built my life around vanished in a single afternoon. For 2 years, I existed in a fog. I went through the motions, made meals I didn't eat, attended family gatherings, where I smiled at the right moments, assured everyone I was doing better when I felt like I was drowning. Sarah and Michael worried constantly. They called every day, visited every weekend, gently suggested therapy, support groups, anything to pull me back to life. Finally, at their urging, I started trying. Community groups, church events, volunteering at the library, small steps toward rejoining the world. That's where I met Ronald. It was a charity fundraiser for the Children's Literacy Program. I was helping set up silent auction tables when this charming, well-dressed man approached me. He was 45 to my 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and a smile that made me feel seen for the first time in 2 years. Ronald Granger was everything Paul hadn't been. Where Paul was steady and reliable, Ronald was exciting and unpredictable. Where Paul was content with our quiet suburban life, Ronald talked about travel, adventure, possibilities. He quoted poetry. He brought me flowers, not on special occasions, but randomly, just because. He took me to restaurants I'd never heard of and weekend trips to coastal towns. He listened to my stories about Paul without jealousy or impatience. He held my hand when I cried. He told me I deserved to be happy again, that Paul would want me to live fully, not just survive. He met my grandchildren and played with them for hours. He called them our family and talked about future holidays together. He made me feel like I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was a woman worthy of love and desire and a second chance at happiness. My children had reservations from the start. Sarah pulled me aside 3 months into our relationship. "Mum, you barely know him. Maybe slow down a little?" I bristled at her concern. "I deserve happiness, Sarah. He makes me feel alive again." Michael tried a different approach. "I'm glad you're happy, Mum. Just be careful, okay? Make sure he wants you for you, not for what Dad left you." I was furious at the implication. "Your father left me comfortable, yes, but Ronald has his own career, his own ambitions. He doesn't need my money. How defensive I'd been. How blind. 8 months after we met, Ronald proposed over dinner at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date. "Let me take care of you," he said, sliding a diamond ring across the table. "Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." At 50 years old, after 2 years of grief and loneliness, after wondering if anyone would ever want me again, I said yes. I said yes, and cried happy tears, and called my children to share the news. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I thought someone had actually wanted me again. I had no idea I'd just signed my own financial death warrant. In the early months of our marriage, Ronald's consulting business was barely surviving. He worked from our dining room table, stressed about landing clients, worried about making ends meet. I watched the man I loved struggle, and I wanted to help. "Paul left me comfortable," I told him one evening. "Let me invest in your dream." I used the life insurance payout from Paul's death, my inheritance from my parents, the savings I'd accumulated over 30 years of careful financial planning. $200,000, everything I had, went into launching Ronald's business properly. Office space, equipment, marketing, staff. He was so grateful. He held me tight and whispered, "I'll make you proud. I promise." Then he said something that should have been my first warning. "Let's put the business in my name. It's cleaner for taxes and you won't have to deal with all the paperwork and liability issues." I trusted him completely. He was my husband. Why would I question him? By year 3, I suggested selling the house I'd shared with Paul. Walking past the bedroom where he'd died, the garage where his tools still hung, it was too painful. "Let's have a fresh start," I told Ronald. "Our home, our memories." We found a beautiful property in a better neighborhood. Ronald handled all the paperwork. "Let me take care of the boring stuff," he insisted. "You've been through enough." I signed where he told me to sign. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't notice that the deed went into his name only, supposedly for estate planning purposes. He was handling our future, protecting us. That's what I believed. Year 5 brought real success to his business. He started landing major contracts with Chinese companies. I was so proud of him, so happy that my investment had paid off. But with success came distance. He traveled constantly, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong. When he came home, he was distracted, always on calls in Mandarin, locked in his office for hours. I felt myself becoming irrelevant. I wasn't part of his business world. I couldn't understand his conversations. I was just the wife who waited at home, who managed the household, who existed in the background of his increasingly important life. That's when I started the Mandarin classes, secret lessons while he traveled, determined to surprise him, desperate to prove I could still be useful, still be part of his world. I practiced pronunciation until my jaw ached. I memorized characters until they swam in my vision. I wanted so badly to matter to him again. By year 8, Ronald took over managing all our finances. "I'm better with money, honey," he said with that charming smile. "Let me handle the investments while you relax. You've earned it." My investment accounts, the ones Paul had carefully built for our retirement, slowly migrated to joint accounts. Then, gradually, into accounts with only Ronald's name. He had explanations for everything: tax advantages, better investment opportunities, estate planning strategies. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But every time I questioned it, he had an answer that sounded reasonable. And I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that my second chance at love was real. Year 12 brought increasingly uncomfortable conversations with my children. Sarah showed up at my door one Saturday morning, her face serious. "Mum, I've been thinking. Why is everything in Ronald's name now? The house? The business? Your accounts?" I felt defensive immediately. "He's my husband, Sarah. What's his is mine. That's how marriage works." "That's not how your marriage to Dad worked," she said quietly. "Everything was joint. Everything was protected." I asked her to leave. Michael tried a few months later, more direct. "Mum, Dad left you secure. You had nearly $500,000 in investments and insurance. Where did that money go?" "Your stepfather takes care of me," I snapped. "I don't need you treating him like he's some kind of criminal. He's been good to me, good to this family." But Michael's eyes were sad when he looked at me. "Has he, Mum? Really?" I chose Ronald over my children's concerns. I defended him at family gatherings when they asked pointed questions. I made excuses for why we couldn't show up to the holidays. The distance between me and Sarah and Michael grew wider with each passing year, and I blamed them for being unfair to the man I loved. If you think you know where this is going, you need to subscribe right now, because what happened next was worse than anything I could have imagined. By year 15, I started taking stock of what I actually owned, really owned, with my name on the paperwork. The house where we lived? Ronald's name only. The business I'd funded with my life insurance money? Ronald Granger Consulting LLC. No mention of Margaret Thompson anywhere. The investment accounts that held Paul's retirement savings, transferred completely into Ronald's sole accounts. The joint savings we'd supposedly been building together. Somehow it became his individual account 2 years ago. What did I have left in my name alone? A checking account with $4,000, some jewelry Paul had given me, my 12-year-old car. That was it. That was all that remained of everything Paul had left me, everything my parents had left me, everything I'd built over 50 years of life. I'd taken a man who was struggling to pay rent on a 1-bedroom apartment and turned him into a millionaire. His business was now worth over $2 million. Our house had appreciated to $850,000. The investment accounts totaled another $500,000, $3.5 million in assets. All in Ronald Granger's name, none in mine. And standing in my kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, listening to him laugh with his sister about how I'd served my purpose, I finally understood the truth. It had always been the plan. From the moment he saw a grieving 50-year-old widow at that charity fundraiser, from the first flower delivery, the first romantic dinner, the first whispered, "I love you." He'd seen exactly what I was: desperate, lonely, and wealthy. The perfect mark. He'd courted me, married me, systematically stripped me of every asset Paul had left to secure my future. And now, with the final property transfers about to be complete, he was ready to discard me. 15 years of my life. 15 years of trust, devotion, and love. All of it was calculated. All of it is fake. I slid down the kitchen cabinet until I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by shattered porcelain, and I finally let myself see Ronald Granger for exactly what he was: a con artist, a predator, a man who'd targeted a vulnerable widow and destroyed her life for profit. But here's what Ronald didn't know as he sat in my living room laughing with his sister. Here's what he couldn't have predicted. I wasn't the same desperate widow he'd married 15 years ago, and I was about to become his worst nightmare. Have you ever had someone underestimate you completely? Drop a comment below, because what I did next required every ounce of strength I didn't know I had. I picked myself up off that kitchen floor, wiped my eyes, and made a decision. Ronald couldn't know that I knew, not yet. Not until I was ready. For the next 3 days, I served Emily Granger meals with a smile. I poured her coffee. I made polite conversation about Seattle weather and her garden back home. And every time they spoke in Mandarin, I listened. I learned that the final property transfer was scheduled for next month. Ronald had been waiting for one last asset shift, moving my remaining checking account funds into a better investment opportunity he'd been planning to suggest. After that, he'd file for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences. His sister had already helped him find an apartment across town. They discussed it all in my living room while I arranged fresh flowers in the hallway. They laughed about it over the dinner I'd spent hours preparing. They planned my destruction in my own home, never suspecting I understood every single word. Those 3 days nearly broke me, but I held on. I smiled. I played the devoted wife. And the moment Emily's flight took off back to Seattle, I fell apart. Week 1, I called Sarah. I could barely get the words out through my sobs. "You were right. You and Michael were right about everything." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Sarah's voice, tight, with controlled fury. "Mom, we tried to warn you." "I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Stop." Her tone shifted immediately. "We don't have time for apologies right now. We'll fix this. Tell me everything." Within 2 hours, Sarah had connected me with Pamela Parker, a divorce attorney who specialized in financial elder abuse cases. By evening, I had an appointment scheduled for the following Monday. "Don't let him know anything's wrong," Sarah instructed. "Can you do that? Can you pretend for a little longer?" I thought about 15 years of lies. "Yes," I said. "I can pretend." Week 2, Michael flew in from Colorado. We met at Sarah's house while Ronald was at a business dinner. My son spread documents across the dining room table, every paper I'd signed over 15 years, every account statement I could find, every piece of evidence I'd quietly gathered. The horror of seeing it on paper was overwhelming. Everything, absolutely everything, was in Ronald's name. The business I'd funded, the house we'd bought together, the investments that had been Paul's legacy to me. Pamela Parker arrived that evening, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the documents. She looked up at me with eyes that had clearly seen this pattern before. "Mrs. Granger, this is textbook financial elder abuse. Undue influence, systematic isolation from family, asset transfer under false pretenses. We can fight this." Those words, elder abuse, made it real in a way nothing else had. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a victim, a mark, someone who'd been deliberately targeted and exploited. But Pamela wasn't finished. "I need you to find every original check, every property transfer document, every form you signed." "Can you do that?" I thought about Ronald's home office. Yes, he keeps everything filed. He never thought I'd look. Week 3, while Ronald traveled to San Francisco for meetings, I photographed every document in his office. Pamela brought in James Rivera, a forensic accountant who traced every dollar of my money through 15 years of transfers. James laid out the numbers that made me physically ill. My initial $200,000 investment, now worth $2.3 million in business value. The house had appreciated from $400,000 to $850,000. The investment accounts he'd managed had grown from $300,000 to $500,000. Total assets Ronald controlled, nearly $3.5 million. Assets that should have been mine, that would have been mine if I'd married an honest man instead of a predator. If you want to see how a 65-year-old woman fought back against the man who stole everything from her, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is where I stopped being a victim and became a force he never saw coming. Week 4, I learned legal terminology I never wanted to know. Fraud, undue influence, financial exploitation, constructive trust, asset recovery. Each term represented another layer of Ronald's betrayal, another way he'd systematically destroyed my financial security. Pamela was building a case that would expose everything, but she needed more. "We need to establish a pattern of manipulation," she explained. "Communication records, witness statements, anything that shows his calculated behavior." Week 5, my children became investigators. Sarah went through years of emails, finding messages where Ronald had isolated me from family events. Michael tracked down old friends I'd lost touch with after marrying Ronald, documenting how he'd gradually cut me off from my support system. We found text messages where Ronald discussed me with his sister, messages going back years, showing this had always been his plan. We found emails to his business partner, joking about his sugar mama wife. We documented every calculated move he'd made to access and control my assets. The evidence was devastating and ironclad. Week 6, the divorce papers were ready. Asset recovery claims filed. Fraud allegations documented. Criminal complaints prepared if he refused to settle. I sat in Pamela's office, staring at the thick stack of legal documents that represented my counterattack. My emotional journey over those 6 weeks had taken me from devastation to fury, to something colder and more powerful, steely resolve. I was 65 years old. I'd survived losing Paul, survived 2 years of grief, and survived 15 years married to a con artist. I'd built one man up from nothing and watched him die trying to mow our lawn. I'd built another man up from nothing and discovered he'd planned to discard me like trash. I was done being a victim. "Our anniversary is in 3 days," I told Pamela. "He's made reservations at that expensive restaurant downtown. He probably thinks he's being romantic." Pamela raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time Ronald learned that I speak Mandarin." The plan came together perfectly. I would confront him publicly, where he couldn't rage or intimidate. I would reveal my secret in his language, using his own weapon against him. I would present the divorce papers and watch his world collapse the way mine had collapsed 6 weeks ago. For 3 days, I practiced my lines in Mandarin. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and repeated the words until they were flawless. "I heard every word you said about me 6 weeks ago." My pronunciation was perfect. My tone was cold. My hands were steady. On our anniversary morning, Ronald brought me coffee in bed like he had for 15 years. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," he said with that charming smile. I smiled back. "Happy anniversary?" He had no idea it would be our last day as husband and wife. He had no idea I'd spent 6 weeks building a legal case that would destroy him. He had no idea that the desperate old widow with money had become the worst miscalculation of his life. That evening, I put on my best dress. I did my makeup carefully. I slipped my wedding ring on my finger one last time. And I drove to that restaurant, ready to end 15 years of lies. What would you do if you discovered your spouse had been stealing from you for over a decade? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next at that anniversary dinner was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. Ronald's champagne glass hung suspended in the air, his rehearsed toast frozen on his lips. To my wonderful wife, 15 amazing years. That's when I spoke. In flawless Mandarin, every word is crisp and deliberate. "I heard every word you said about me 6 weeks ago." I watched his face transform in slow motion. Confusion first, his eyes narrowing, trying to process what language I'd just spoken. Then shock as comprehension hit. Then pure, absolute terror as he understood what my words meant. The champagne glass slipped from his hand. Crystal shattered against china. Golden liquid spread across the white tablecloth, like his lies finally spilling into the open. I continued in Mandarin, my voice steady and cold. I quoted his exact words back to him. "She's served her purpose. Desperate old widow with money. Exactly what I needed 15 years ago." His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. His hands started shaking. Finally, he managed to stammer in English. You learned Chinese?" I gave him a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. 5 years ago, I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary. Consider me surprised." I opened the folder I'd brought with me. The sound of papers sliding across the table cut through the restaurant's quiet murmur. Divorce papers on top, fraud allegations beneath, asset recovery claims, criminal complaint forms. Ronald's eyes went wide as he registered what he was seeing. "We can talk about this. We don't need lawyers." I cut him off, still speaking in Mandarin. "I heard everything. Your timeline, your plans, your contempt for the desperate old woman who gave you everything." Then I switched to English, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You targeted a grieving widow, Ronald. You saw a vulnerable 50-year-old woman, and you calculated exactly how to exploit her." I laid out the documents, one by one. My original investment check for $200,000, property transfer forms, bank statements showing the systematic movement of my assets into his accounts. He tried to justify it, his voice rising. "I built that business. I'm the one who landed the clients." "With my $200,000, I said calmly. "With Paul's life insurance money. With my children's inheritance. You built your empire on my dead husband's legacy, and you planned to throw me away when you were done." I leaned forward. "Financial elder abuse, Ronald. Fraud. Undue influence. Those are the legal terms for what you did to me." His face went pale. "That's not... I didn't... We're married. Married couples share assets." 17 documented instances," I interrupted. 17 times you transferred my assets into your name under false pretenses. Tax advantages, estate planning, investment opportunities. All lies." His voice rose, desperate now. Other diners were definitely watching. "You can't prove I manipulated you. You signed everything willingly." I leaned forward until my face was inches from his. "You discussed it in detail, in Mandarin, which I recorded." The color drained completely from his face. "You recorded us? 6 weeks of conversations, every plan, every calculation, every laugh at my expense. You and Emily laid out your entire scheme, and I understood every single word." I watched his world collapse in real time. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His breathing became shallow. He looked like a man realizing he'd just destroyed his own life. "I'm reclaiming everything," I continued, my voice steel. "The business is half mine. I have original investment documents and founding paperwork. The house will be sold and divided. Every penny you transferred from my accounts will be traced and recovered. James Rivera is a very thorough forensic accountant." Ronald's voice came out as a whisper. "I'll be left with nothing." I stood up, gathering my papers. "You came to me with nothing, Ronald. You'll leave with nothing. Fair trade. If you think this is satisfying, wait until you hear what happened after I walked out. Subscribe right now because the ending gets even better." I placed the exact cash for my meal on the table. Not our meal. My meal. Let him figure out how to pay for his own dinner. Ronald made one last desperate attempt. "After 15 years, after everything we've been through together, this is how you..." "After 15 years of lies," I interrupted. After 15 years of systematically stealing from a woman who loved you, sign the papers or face criminal charges? Pamela Parker will be in touch. I picked up my purse and turned to leave. Then I looked back one final time and spoke in Mandarin, clear enough for anyone who understood the language to hear. You underestimated a desperate old widow. That was your mistake. I walked through that restaurant with my head high, past the staring diners, past the shocked waiters, past the life I'd built on lies, and into the truth waiting outside. The evening air hit my face as I pushed through the doors, and there, in the parking lot, exactly where they'd promised to be, stood Sarah and Michael, my children, my real family, the people who'd tried to warn me and who'd forgiven me anyway. I walked into their arms and finally let myself break down. 15 years of pretending, 6 weeks of investigating, and 1 hour of confrontation had taken everything I had left. "We've got you, Mum," Sarah whispered. "We've got you." Michael held us both. "You were incredible in there. Dad would be so proud." Paul, my first husband, the man who'd actually loved me, the man who'd built a secure future for me that I'd almost let a con artist destroy. The legal battle took 8 months. Ronald fought hard, hired expensive lawyers, claimed the business was his alone, that the house had always been intended as his, that I'd willingly transferred assets. But Pamela Parker was better. She had recordings, documents, witness statements from my children about his systematic isolation tactics, expert testimony about elder financial abuse patterns, and she had me, a credible, sympathetic plaintiff who'd been targeted at her most vulnerable. We settled before trial. Ronald kept 20% of the business value. Pamela said a judge might award him something for his labor anyway. I got the house, 80% of the business value, and every penny of my original investments, plus appreciation. Nearly $2.8 million recovered. Not everything, but enough. Enough to secure my future. Enough to rebuild what he'd stolen. Enough to leave my children and grandchildren the legacy Paul had intended. I moved in temporarily with Sarah while the legal proceedings concluded. I reconnected with my grandchildren, who I'd seen too little of during the years Ronald had slowly isolated me. I told them stories about their grandfather Paul, keeping his memory alive the way I should have been doing all along. The bitter lesson I learned was this. I'd almost failed to honor Paul's memory by protecting what he'd left me. I'd let grief and loneliness make me vulnerable to a predator. I'd ignored my children's warnings and nearly destroyed the financial security my first husband had worked 30 years to build. But I'd also learned something else. At 65 years old, I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Strong enough to spend 6 weeks pretending. Strong enough to build a legal case. Strong enough to look my abuser in the eye and take back what was mine. I gave Ronald Granger 15 years of my life. He thought I'd give him everything. My money, my assets, my dignity, my children's inheritance. He forgot I was a mother first. And mothers protect what's ours. Today, I live in a smaller house that's entirely in my name. I have relationships rebuilt with my children and grandchildren. I volunteer with an elder abuse prevention program, helping other women recognize the warning signs I missed. And I have financial security again. Not as much as I would have had if I'd never met Ronald, but enough. Sarah asked me recently if I regretted those 15 years. Every single day, I told her honestly. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret learning Mandarin. And I definitely don't regret seeing the look on his face when he realized his desperate old widow understood every word. Ronald moved to another state. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's struggling financially, living in a small apartment, his business reputation destroyed by the fraud allegations. Part of me feels nothing. Part of me feels a grim satisfaction. But mostly I'm focused on the future, on securing my legacy for Sarah and Michael, on being present for my grandchildren, on living the life Paul wanted for me, safe, secure, surrounded by people who actually love me. I'm 71 now. 6 years have passed since that anniversary dinner, and I'm finally, truly free. Have you ever been manipulated by someone you trusted? Have you ever had to fight back against someone who underestimated you? Drop your story in the comments. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power, your dignity, and your life. Because con artists like Ronald count on their victims staying silent, staying ashamed, staying defeated. I refuse to be any of those things. And if my story helps even one person recognize the warning signs, fight back against financial abuse, or find the courage to leave a manipulative relationship, then maybe those 15 years weren't completely wasted after all. What would you do in my situation? Let me know in the comments below.